Well, good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 293 of the Prancing Pony podcast, where, well, the pyre of Denethor is cooled down just enough to bring a guest into the common room.
Though I'd still advise them not to get close to the embers. Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I'm KnewBetta, and I'm here with the man of the West who has bravely revamped his wardrobe since 2019. Alan Sisto.
For good reason, sir, for good reason. Folks, today we are welcoming back a friend of the common room whose first time on the show was far too brief and whose last visit was far too long ago. Shawn Marchese and I first had the privilege of meeting him at Tolkien 2019 in Birmingham.
You had him on the show for a brief chat then, along with many other guests, in episode 136 to start out season 4. I won't remind you what he said about your shirt.
You don't need to. And despite his, it must be said now, excellent taste, we enjoyed his company so much that we had him back on for a full sit down just a few months later in episode 147.
And here we are, nearly 147 episodes after that, folks.
Yeah.
Probably known best as the lead writer of the 1981 BBC radio dramatization of The Lord of the Rings.
But did you know he also adapted the 1992 radio plays for other Tolkien works, Farmer Giles of Ham, Smith of Wootton Major, Leaf by Niggle, and The Adventures of Tom Bombadil? And of course, he's also written more books about Middle-earth and the films than just about anybody around.
Including official movie guides for each of Peter Jackson's films and The Lord of the Rings, the making of the movie trilogy.
But of course, he's done so much more than that. He's lent his voice to some of his own projects as a narrator. He's written more books and screenplays, won a ton of awards, including the 2023 Tolkien Society-award for Best Book, which we'll be talking about today, and even more importantly, the 2022 award for Outstanding Contribution. Now, I can't run out of superlatives, but I can run out of time. So let me just stop now and welcome back to the Prancing Pony podcast, Brian Sibley.
Hi, guys. It's lovely to be with you both.
Hey, what's going on, man? It is a pleasure.
And although people can't see me, I will confess that, inspired by Alan's sartorial brilliance, I am wearing a very, very loud blue and white Hawaiian shirt, which I hope restores our friendship to.
As I wear the simplest of black T-shirts. All right. Well, we've got a lot of questions, and we are really excited to have you on, Brian. Thank you so much for your patience in trying to make this happen. But KnewBetta, would you get us started with an introduction question?
Absolutely. Before we get into the Tolkien questions, of which we have many, we wanted to get an update from you on your last visit to the Prancing Pony podcast. Your Christmas book, Joseph and the Three Gifts, had just been published. It was rightly described as the story of an ordinary man caught up in extraordinary events. Any fun stories to relate about the book, its release, or the broadcast on the BBC Radio 4?
Well, thanks for mentioning that little book. I'm not sure how it's very slight, and I'm not sure it's been that successful because certainly haven't seen any royalties from it. But the people who read it enjoyed it, and the idea. It came from an idea when I was in Venice, the Christmas previous to its being published, and I went to one of the big churches in Venice, and they had one of those nativity scenes that you see in churches around Christmas time. But in Italy, they are very, very elaborate. I mean, they take up an area half the size of a room. All the figures are moving figures. So there's people washing clothes, potter at his wheels, somebody baking in an oven. All this stuff's going on. And the thing about it, what struck me about it was that, yes, there is a point in this diorama where you see Mary and Joseph and the baby, but they are just part of a very, very busy scene that is going on. And that reminded me that, we often on Christmas cards and things you see the kind of imagery we're used to seeing. But in fact, this event, as indeed most people's births, however special they are, is something which is happening against a much broader tapestry of loads and loads of stuff going on in the rest of society. Whether it's in the hospital you're in, if you're having a birth, or in your family, in the street where you live, life goes on. So that was the beginning of it. And also I'd noticed in a lot of paintings and pictures that Joseph kind of is always in the background. He's kind of, just there looking lovingly mystified at this baby. I decided it was a great idea to try and focus on what it must have been like to be as you put it, this ordinary man in extraordinary circumstances. So that was the story of the book. And I didn't expect to find a publisher for it. I just wrote it for the pleasure of writing it because I wanted to write it. I offered it to a publisher. They said they'd like a month to think about it, and that was fine. And came back the next day and said, yes, we want it, which was slightly surprising. Awesome. And yes, it did. Well, yes, it doesn't happen very often. No. Yes, it ended up being, I had to virtually rewrite it to adapt it for a reading on the BBC, where it was read by Alex Jennings. And so a nice little kind of unexpected story that came out of a visit to Venice. So I didn't ever claim the fares to Venice as research, but
a little tax deduction. I like that.
That's awesome.
Well, it was a sweet little story. So I'm glad that it's out there, and I'm glad that folks can enjoy it.
Thank you.
Got another interesting little book that you've done. It turns out you wrote a very long time ago. I want to ask you about. The world of Tolkien fandom has brought people together in so many ways, sometimes to work on projects that are unrelated to Tolkien. Osric the Extraordinary Owl is one of those. The story behind its publication involves not just you as the author, but the incredible artist and illustrator Pauline Baynes, whose 1969 map of Middle-earth is still absolutely one of my favorite pieces of Tolkien art. Also includes another well-known Tolkien artist, Jay Johnstone, and Tolkien scholars, former guests on the PPP, Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull. Tell us how that story, which when I looked it up, it looks like you wrote it all the way back in 1970. How did that finally come to be published?
Well, it is a story because I had long, and my partner David, we'd been friends with Pauline for many years. In fact, I was friends with Pauline before I met David. So Pauline and I had known each other for a long, long time. And it was towards the end of her life when she was finding it very difficult to get any work at all because publishers had felt that her style of illustration had frankly become old-fashioned, and it wasn't, the kind of stuff that kids wanted in picture books today. And she got very depressed about it. And I had written this story. Originally, I'd written it for another artist altogether who was a Marcheseist who wanted to feature a lot of birds in his work. And so that's how it began. He never picked it up and ran with it. So it had been, even when I offered it to Pauline, it had been lying around for a long time. So I took it out of the drawer, blew the dust off it, tinkered with it a bit. Yeah. And I took it down to her home, and I said, look, Pauline, I know she was just painting for the love of painting. She did a picture. She was always painting, but obviously it was never going to be published. It was just private work she was doing. And I said, well, have a look at this and see if you think you might like to be able to illustrate it. And she duly read it, and then she dropped me a card and said, well, I like the story, but the thing is I can't draw owls. Now, the one thing, if anybody knows anything about Pauline Baynes' artwork, they will know that animals and birds were her real speciality.
Yeah.
She drew landscapes, but any of the books in which she drew animals, think of most of the books, the Narnia Chronicles.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking of, right?
Yeah. They are full of birds and animals. So, and in fact, in one of the Narnian Chronicles, there is a whole parliament of owls that meet, and she illustrated. So I wasn't going to take that for a no. The thing you need to understand about my friendship with Pauline was that she found visitors quite stressful. She was a rather an anxious person. And if you said, oh, could we come down and see you tomorrow or next week, she'd find a reason why that couldn't possibly happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
She had to clean the house. The dogs would need walking, and she wouldn't be able to get any food in. And it was always an enormous kind of drama. And so David and I, in the end, hit on what became our way of dealing with it, which was that we'd set off in the car. I mean, she didn't very often go anywhere else, so it was always a bit of a gamble. But and when we got near Guildford, which was about 10, 15, 20 minutes from where she lived, I'd ring her on the phone and say, oh, Pauline, we're out on the road. We're near Guildford. We're going to pop in and see you. And she would immediately say, no, you can't. I haven't got anything. I said, no, it's all right. We'll book the local pub for lunch.
Yeah.
She always went along with this ruse because she did like seeing people. And when you were there, she loved engaging with you on all kinds of things. She was one of the most interesting people I've ever known. So anyway, on this particular occasion, we stopped off on the way at a local bird world sanctuary thing. And I picked up a book of owl photographs. And I took it with me. And when we got there, she said, "I'm sorry, I can't do the book. It's a nice little story, but I can't do it." And I said, "Well, I've brought you this now. And it's a book of owls." Now, I knew she didn't need a book to paint an owl. It was kind of like, there wasn't an argument after that, because it's like, well, I've now got a book of these pictures, of owls. So fast forward a few months, 2 or 3 months, we go down to see her again. And I don't mention the book, but she does bring it up over lunch and says, by the way, I've done a few drawings for your book, but they are really terrible. She says, the worst work I've ever done. It's I can't even bring myself to show it to you. So I said, okay, right. So, well, no, don't ask me to show it, because I'm not going to show it. No, okay, fine. Anyway, back at the house in the afternoon, she goes off to the kitchen to make a cup of tea for us. And I know what her work desk is in the same room that David and I are sitting in. So I know exactly where she keeps her art. So I walk across the room. She's merrily in the kitchen. I can hear her filling the kettle and boiling the water. And I rummage around and I find 2 or 3 of these pictures, which are just wonderful. They're just amazing. Yeah. So I put them back under what they were covered up with and don't say anything. And then fast forward to the next visit when we go, and she says, "I've done a few more pictures." I said, "Are you going to show me this time?" No. And I said, "Well, last time we were here, I did actually look at the ones you'd already done, and I think they're brilliant." And she was so taken aback. So she finished the work. And the reason it languished for so long really was one of Pauline's American friends came over, and he took all the artwork back to America in search of a publisher for it. Didn't succeed in finding one, and returned it to me via Pauline. And it was in Pauline's house waiting for me to pick it up when she died. And it went into the estate, and I had great difficulty in getting access to it. Eventually, the person who inherited from Pauline's estate handed it over to me, and that was generous of them, and I now have all the pictures. And then we're talking about Tolkien 2019, when you and I met for the first time. Jay Johnston was at that event as well. And I said to him, I was telling him this story because he's a great admirer of Pauline, and he's written about her work, and he's got a huge collection of her books and some of her artwork. So I said to him, would you like to see these? So he came up to my hotel room, and we showed him on my computer. And he said, "I'll publish that. I'll do it."
Nice.
So he set it out as a kind of task that he was going to do that and get it published. And we drew in Wayne, and Christina had known Pauline for an awful long time as well. In fact, I knew Christine before she ever married Wayne. So we all
way back.
We all knew each other. And asked Wayne if he would, as her curator of her material in America, whether he would write an introduction forward to the book. So that's how all those talents came together. And I don't know whether, Pauline was a difficult character in so many ways. And I think she would have said, "Oh, it looks terrible," and so on. But I hope secretly that she would have been pleased to see the work in finished form. And it was one of 2 or 3 last things that she worked on before she died. She was working on a book of art connected with passages from the Quran, which has never seen the light of day. And she was also working on a book of Aesop's fables, which again has never been published. So it's one of the projects right at the end of her life. So for me, it was a very special kind of resolution to something, and a kind of coda to a friendship which had been for me for many years a very special friendship. I remember first going down to see her. Her husband was still alive at that point, and we went out and had something to eat, or we ate in the house. I can't remember. And she ran me in her car to the railway station to come home. And when we got into the train, in those days, British railway carriages had windows that you could pull down and, speak to somebody outside on the platform or whatever. Yeah. Can't do that anymore. That I was in there, and I lowered the window in order to just, wait till the train pulled out and say goodbye to her. And as the train was beginning to pull out, she handed me an envelope and said, "Open it when you're on when the train pulls out." And I did. And inside, she'd given me a drawing which had been made by Ernest Shepard, E.H. Shepard, who was, as your listeners will know, was the artist who illustrated A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh in books, and also the Willows, and many, many other books. Mm-hmm. He had been a long-term friend of Pauline's, fellow artists. She much younger than him, but she saw him as a kind of mentor and friend. And this was a particular illustration that he had given to her from one of his books. Not Winnie the Pooh or Winnie the Willows, but a nice illustration for a book by a writer called something. My brain's just gone. The book was called The Silver Value.
That's all right.
And she passed it on to me, and that was very much how she was. She was an extremely generous and gracious friend. And awesome. I've got several pieces of her artwork because we collaborated on a book called The Land of Narnia, where she did 3 or 4 new art pieces, and I have one of those. And I also have the drawing that she did for a book called, which I'm sure is on your bookcase somewhere, Poems and Stories. That edition of Farmer Giles and Smith and the others. And she did a drawing of Farmer Giles with Christophelax, the dragon, and she gave that to me as a gift. So I've lots of memories of Pauline, and I'm happy that this little book got published. So I think Jay Johnson's still got stocks, I believe. So head over to Jay's website, anybody who's interested, and I'm sure he'd be delighted to sell you one.
Yeah. Well, I'll just tell you, I actually ordered, when I found out about its existence, I ordered one. So mine's on its way. I just got the email from Jay Johnston's folk this morning. It's been dispatched. So I'm looking forward to putting it on these shelves for sure and taking a look at it. Well, we're going to get a lot more, folks, from Brian right after the break. Well, folks, we'll get back to our chat with Brian shortly, but we do want to make sure you know that even after you've listened to the episode, there is a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony podcast.
The PPP has an amazing listener community. They always come up with great questions and discussions across all our social media spaces. Check out our common room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
Now, on Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast. Follow the page to get the news and the episodes, but be sure to join the group to get involved in some great discussions.
Or if you prefer Reddit, find us there at r/Prancing Pony Pod. On Twitter and Instagram, we're simply at Prancing Pony Pod.
That's right. And finally, my all-new daily podcast, Today's Tolkien Times, should be out by now. It's a short 6 to 8 minute show available wherever you get your podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, also available in video form on YouTube. Each weekday features something different, from Tolkien Tuesdays to Fandom Fridays. So join me on this new adventure. Visit TolkienTimes.com and follow at Tolkien Times on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can find me on Facebook at Today's Tolkien Times. Well, let's get back to chatting with Brian. Love what we've talked about so far. We haven't even touched on Tolkien stuff, really, but we're going to change that for now. When we last spoke with you in 2019, the Rings of Power was just a glint in Jeff Bezos's eye. We asked you at the time about how the Tolkien fandom had changed since you'd discovered Tolkien works as a young man. And so now we're asking that same question again, but with a smaller time frame, specifically limited to the last 3 years, that includes the first season of the Rings of Power. For good and or for ill, what have you seen change in the fandom in the last few years?
Well, nothing in my estimation as dramatic has happened when Peter Jackson became involved, because I think I probably said to you last time we talked that the thing that had always struck me most forcibly was that, having been a member of the society, the Tolkien Society, and looked at a lot of fanzines and fan art, that I was very conscious that the moment Jackson had crystallized a vision of Gandalf and Frodo and Bilbo and all the other characters. The moment that happened on film, all the fan art seemed to just follow suit, and
it did.
Gandalf looked like a picture of Ian McKellen. What hasn't happened since the Rings of Power is that anybody seems to have recalibrated those features.
That's true.
But I had very mixed feelings about it. I mean, I saw the first 2 episodes at last year's Oxenmoot with other people down there. We saw 2 episodes, and I was one of the people who was hauled onto a panel to talk about it the moment it had finished. So
no pressure. I just have an opinion right now.
No pressure. And it was very hard to kind of quantify it immediately on seeing those 2 episodes. Particularly that I have to say, I wasn't prepared for the fact that we were actually only going to be looking at what is the last few hundred years of the Second Age. I mean, I can imagine that they might have gone back even, to the creation of Númenor. But I mean, it became clear that we were actually in the last gasp of Númenorian culture. So that was a bit of a surprise. Yes, there were a few flashbacks to the First Age, the creation of the Second Age a little bit, but basically everything was rooted in the point at which we are heading towards the downfall very, very fast. So that took me very much by surprise. My mixed feelings, I guess, were first of all, on the good side, that I loved the way they honored the Jackson imagery. Now, I'm not having just said what I did about the Jackson imagery. I don't believe that's the only way of looking at Middle Earth, because, all the artists, I mean, particularly Ted Naismith, Alan Lee and John Howe, but many others as well, have shown us that, there's lots of ways of looking at Middle Earth and the characters.
True.
But John and Alan particularly influenced the style of Peter's films. Yeah. And I thought that what the Amazon project did was at least honor that, so that the Elven communities looked as though they belonged in the same world and the same culture as the Rivendell that was created for The Lord of the Rings, for example. And I appreciated that, because I thought that one of the things that they had done was to realize how strongly that visual imagery had been created by the Jackson movie filmmakers, and that it bought into that, and therefore it was easier to go along with what you were watching, for the simple reason that it looked right. It looked as you thought it ought to look. Yeah. So appreciated that. I didn't appreciate quite so pleasantly, though, the fast and loose that they played with, virtually every other element of the story. But on the other hand, it was easy to predict that this was how it was going to be, because, they didn't have access to certain material. They had very limited sources that they could work from. And there is very little dialogue in the documents which exist, and if they're working from what they were from the appendix, there's nothing there. So you've got to invent, you've got to create. So I thought they tried. I loved there were lots of little touches. I remember being really struck when I realized that there was an inn that features in I can't remember which episode it was now, maybe the second or third episode, and there's kind of like an engraving on a standing stone outside the inn, and it shows an eagle with a child. There are lots of little in jokes, exactly, but in references that were there for the Tolkien fans. So I thought it was lavishly made. I found the dwarves far more acceptable than I had expected to. Yeah, didn't mind that quite so much. I thought that the characters looked somehow, or many of the characters looked too modern, and I don't know what that means really, except that an Elrond with short hair, those things kind of for me felt like they were trying to make the characters more like they might be in, say, Game of Thrones or one of the other popular fantasy series. Everybody wasn't going around with long locks and golden hair and so on. But it just felt to me unfulfilled. It felt like a huge amount of money had been lavished on something which I don't feel really added hugely to appreciation of Tolkien, certainly. And I'm not sure added an awful lot to, the extended art of Middle-earth. But, who knows? I hold my judgment for the second season.
Time will tell.
Yeah. See if they...
Yeah, absolutely.
Adjust. Shawn and Alan asked you back then about what advice you'd give the Amazon team working on the show. As they prepare for the second season, what changes, if any, would you advise they implement?
Well, I think what I would like them to do, because they have used flashbacks in the first season, and they're not going to take any notice of what I say anyway. But I would recommend that they try and build into this story something about the earlier days of the Second Age, because for me, the importance, and we'll come to this later when we talk about Númenor, but to me, the importance of the Númenorian story is how it began and how it ends.
Yes,
and if you don't have a context for the way in which the Númenorian culture began, it's very hard to read and understand fully the portrayal of its downfall. And I think they can redress that. I mean, I don't know how many more seasons they're going to be, but there is time to go back in history and have flashbacks, which would help see how this wonderful looking community had changed from the way it was initially created, as a gift from the Valar to man, a reward, and not just an overblown society which is now posturing towards death and decay. And I think they could restore a lot of that by doing that. I'm personally tired of Galadriel the warrior, but that's part of a culture that's long been part of fantasy art and literature and filmmaking. So there's nothing new in that. It doesn't sit easily with my vision of Galadriel, but I know a lot of people find that attractive and exciting. So, but I'd like them just to do that, to just reflect, if they can, a little bit of what went before, and I think they can do that from the appendices if they put their mind to it.
Yeah, I think you're right with the flashbacks. That's certainly a way to get that done.
Absolutely. It'll help ease the time crunch. That the time crunch is hard to swallow, and it'll help ease that and go back to the beginnings of the Second Age, which are very important.
Well, I hope they listen to you. I know they haven't listened to me. You at least have an outstanding contribution to Tolkien Society-award, so perhaps they will listen to you on that. In fact, that's something I want to talk about real briefly. The fandom has brought you a couple of significant awards since the last time you've been here. One was just a couple months back, the 2023 Best Book Award for The Fall of Númenor, which we're about to spend the rest of our episode talking about. And then there was the one last year for Outstanding Contribution, which is the Tolkien Society's Lifetime Achievement Award. It's been won by real giants in the field, Tom Shippey, Verlin Flieger, John Garth, and many others, not to mention Christopher Tolkien and Priscilla Tolkien. So tell us a little bit about how you felt when you heard the news that you were getting that. And will you ever have to buy a pint in Oxford again?
What a nice thought. Well, I was totally astonished when I heard the news. And the funny thing was that at the time that they gave me the award, nobody in the Tolkien Society knew that I was working on The Fall of Númenor. And of course, it was still under wraps. And so I wasn't able to say, well, thank you, that's absolutely wonderful, and actually you'll be pleased to know I couldn't do that. So I was told about it, and I was really taken aback, because yes, I've been involved in stuff to do with Tolkien for a long time, but I don't consider myself, never have considered myself as a kind of leading academic. I'm not in the same, certainly not as Christopher, but certainly not in the same league as Tom and some of the others, I mean, Wayne and Christina have also won the award. So I kind of thought that my contributions, which have been, mostly media associated, were a little bit below the bar. So it was something that I never expected to win. The dragon, which is this kind of beautiful bronze dragon, which stands about just short of a foot high, I guess, and is really beautiful with its wings.
It is
astonishing, really lovely to see. And so very, very thrilled, quite taken aback. I was told I was not at the AGM. I can't remember where the AGM was actually happening on that day, but I couldn't be at it. So I was on it virtually. and somebody said, "Oh, you need to say something at the AGM," and I'd actually was already booked to be somewhere for dinner, so I couldn't get out of that. So I then recorded on the computer a kind of message, which I did about 6 or 7 times because I wasn't happy with it. But anyway, it was an enormous honor, a great privilege to be with all those other people. And yeah, it felt really like something very special. And of course, when I did get to sit down with Shawn Gunner, the chair of the Tolkien Society at last year's Oxford Moot, and I took the award down there so that everybody could see it and it could be on the table while we were having a conversation. I pointed out that, I'd been so sort of surprised by it that it was something that I never ever expected to achieve. But it was nice to be able to, at that point, talk about it rather more thoroughly. And of course, Shawn began the conversation by saying, well, we gave you the award and you didn't say, well, we know what's coming at the end of the year. I was in a position where I couldn't, but it was a great honor, and another very pleasing honor that the book this year was his best book. I mean, my money was on the Great Tales Never End book for Christmas, to which I contributed an essay, but I thought that would be the book which would win. I also loved Nick Groom's book on the Tolkien, 21st century Tolkien, which I thought was an excellently written book. Yeah. And he wrote, just in passing, that was why I said it was an excellent book. It was an excellent book all round, but he wrote very perceptively about the radio series of 1981. And I thought that was a really new piece of, I won't say groundbreaking, because it was all the material at all that he was talking about was already in existence, but as an analysis of the way the world has responded to Tolkien in different media and things, I thought his book was ace, and indeed I voted for his book, not feeling I couldn't dare to vote for my own book.
Oh, I know, yeah.
But what I would say is that the book, the honor for that is not just something that it goes to me, but it goes to everybody at HarperCollins who decided to do the book. Chris Smith, my editor, who saw the book through a really tight turnaround schedule of producing the book and getting it out, and Alan Lee, who's embellished it so beautifully. We'll talk about that later. But so, that award I feel I share really with at least 2 other people, but probably everybody at HarperCollins as well, and the Tolkien Estate, who allowed me to do it, because come to that, in that I was the first person really, apart from Carl Hofstetter, to be allowed to handle any of this material. So that was anyway. So thrilled and delighted. And the dragon, if we'd been on camera, I actually have it sitting next to me here, and I would have held it up. I could have held it up for long. It weighs a ton, and it was delivered to me in a small a small carry-on luggage case. I thought it can't be that big that it needs to come in a case, but it did, because it's very, very heavy, but it's beautiful.
Well, congratulations. Well earned.
Very well earned. You're in great company, and they are in great company as well.
Well, thank you for that. That's very kind of, and honestly, nobody can have too many dragons in their house.
No,
not at all.
They don't give dragons for those other awards. That's just the outstanding contribution one, because we still to this day, I don't know how we managed to get 2 Tolkien Society awards, but I
was just about to say, you predicted me slightly that. You've also been honoured as for your extraordinary work, which is how many episodes did you say you're now up?
This is now episode 293, and we still got about we put up about 45 a year, and I've got 1 more year for the Return of the King, and then I'm going to do another season of sort of like extra legendarium. So we'll cover the appendices. We'll cover some of the more intact stories from Unfinished Tales. I cannot wait to spend 12 weeks on Eldarion and Arendis, for instance. As well as some stuff from History of Middle Earth, the more complete stories, and then a season of non-legendarium, because then we get to my favorite thing, like Leaf by Niggle, Smith, Woot, and Major. And then probably another 2 seasons of Silmarillion. Wrap it up again.
I watch a lot of online stuff to do with Tolkien, and you are out there way at the head of the game. And so congratulations to you, and keep doing the wonderful work you're doing.
Well, let's get into the Fall of Númenor. KnewBetta, I think you get to lead off kind of the main meat of this episode. Oh, what a book this is. What a book this is.
What an amazing book. We were, if I could just say one thing, man, we were remarking yesterday when we were talking about how well this book is chronicled. And I have to give you my praise from the deepest depths of my soul. That's probably what sets this book apart. And you deserve all the praise. The way you incorporate the timeline and make it just so understandable, it's the best it's been done in the entire Legendarium. This is the best chronicling, especially of the Second Age, and it sets it far apart from any other work. That's the best thing I've seen in this entire work, of how everything is chronicled and it's in a certain order. It's understandable. The notes that go with it is phenomenal. So the time that you took to do that, you deserve all the praise, and definitely the dragon that you received.
Eglerio.
So I just no problem at all. I know we spoke a bit ago about the Rings of Power. That set of stories from Amazon takes place in the Second Age of Middle-earth. And one of the main storylines is that the men of the island of Númenor, and late last year, you edited The Fall of Númenor. Can you provide us a brief synopsis of the book for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with it yet?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think I wasn't part of the deliberations at HarperCollins about why they decided to do this book, but I think it's probably common understanding and appreciation that knowing that the Amazon series was coming, people would want to know more about the Second Age. And of course, I don't know whether there are going to be books published. I thought there were going to be some books published specifically about the Amazon series. They don't seem to have materialized yet.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I thought early on that I might be in the running for being asked to do one of those. But out of the blue for me came this suggestion that I could perhaps do a book which brought together everything to do with the Second Age into one volume. And I'm going to be totally frank with you, because it was a very tight deadline. I initially looked at it and then went back to Chris Smith, the editor, and said, I can't do this. It's too big a project to be able to do in the kind of time that's available to me.
Yeah.
But he persuaded me to think again, and I took a breath and looked at it all again, because essentially, and many of your listeners will know this, of course, there's a lot of writings about the Second Age, but they are distributed across many, many volumes. I mean, significantly, the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales. But beyond that, many of Christopher Tolkien's volumes of the history of Middle-earth contain bits and pieces about the Second Age, or aspects of the Second Age, or characters in the Second Age. And I was realizing there had to be some structure. And I really appreciate what you just said about the fact that you liked the way in which it was chronologically set out. And for me, when I looked at it, I thought, well, there's these appendices. And, like everybody since Amazon threw their hat into the ring, we all have looked at those appendices, a page and a half at the back of The Return of the King. I mean, a page and a half of dates anyway, which sets out the Second Age. And we've looked at those and looked at them. And I thought that's the timeline. That was Tolkien's timeline that he put into the appendices. That's where I'm going to start. So that became the kind of keystone, really. Now, many of the names of the kings and some queens that are listed there, we know very little or nothing about, actually. But that it didn't matter, because all the key things, all the key moments were also within that structure. And I thought, I'm going to make that timeline the basis, and I'll hang everything onto it. Now, I'm very aware, and there have been critics of the book, and I accept their criticism absolutely, who would say, well, Tolkien didn't write it chronologically, which is true, because he was writing many of those pieces at different times, different eras of life. And they weren't meant to just follow sequentially one after another. But that was the way I thought I could make it most readily available. Early on, I said to Chris Smith, one of the things I want to bring into this is, well, two things I wanted to bring in. One is some of the references that Tolkien put into his correspondence, into his letters to people about Númenor, where he was explaining the Second Age and aspects of the Second Age and the history for people to understand, particularly one letter where he was writing to somebody who he thought might take the book on, Martin Waldman, who worked for a different publisher to George Allen and Unwin. At that point, George Allen and Unwin weren't interested in publishing stuff relating to anything other than the Lord of the Rings story. And he kind of sold, it's a pitch document really, about why the whole story should be told as a piece. And that was really useful. I wanted to use that, but I also wanted to draw into the book passages from the Lord of the Rings itself, because it seemed to me that those things which I remember when I first read the Lord of the Rings, and you get to Rivendell and there's the council, and Elrond is talking about stuff, and as is Gandalf, things which you just cannot believe. Well, you can believe them, but you don't know what they're about, really. You know, when Elrond says that he was there on the slopes of Mount Doom as banner bearer for Elendil, and he witnessed the end of Sauron and witnessed Isildur taking the ring for himself and counseled him, Isildur, not to take the ring because it was a dangerous thing to do. You know, those elements are there. And in the same passage, you know, Gandalf talks about going through the archives at Minas Tirith and reading what was Isildur's first account of putting on the ring and how it felt, the way in which it felt hot and then didn't feel hot once he'd got it on, but it totally was transforming his personality. And I thought some of those passages which link the characters which we're all very familiar with, like Gandalf and Elrond from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, if I can bring some of that in, so that people find there's a link to this history which they're reading for the first time, perhaps, that it links it to things that they're familiar with. So, and again, with the reference to the White Tree and those kind of elements in the story, I fished out of the book those kind of passages and linked to them. And sometimes it was helpful because there's very little description in the Second Age writings about what Mordor was like in the Second Age. There's practically no visual description of it by Tolkien at all. So I augmented those passages with references to what Mordor looked like at the time of the Third Age, when Frodo and Sam are fighting their way towards Mount Doom, and threw those in as well as a kind of, well, this is a later age, but this is the kind of landscape that we're talking about in this book. So it was a jigsaw puzzle in a way. And I didn't know how to tackle it at first, but what I then decided to do was realized I couldn't actually just sit there with, I think it was about 15 volumes in all that I needed to have reference to at any given time. I couldn't sit there, particularly not with, you know, the deluxe editions or even my early first or second editions of the books. So I just went ahead and bought paperback copies of all the history of Middle-earth and then rip them up. I never rip books up. I never fold the corners over. I never write on them. You know, the books are so precious to me that I treat them as kind of hallowed on. But now I started scribbling on them, crossing bits through, writing notes saying, see volume, History of Middle-earth volume, such and such, page so-and-so. And then I had all these bits of paper, a notebook stuffed with kind of reference notes. And then I had to set about HarperCollins were hugely helpful. They gave me all the documents as documents, so I was able to take the material directly. I didn't have to retype the whole thing.
Oh, man.
Nice.
Copy and paste,
Well, copy and paste, but then copy and paste, it can be dangerous. You have to be really careful what you're doing. You don't mislink anything. I had to write the notes at the same time, because if I didn't write the notes, I would never have remembered where an extract came from once it was in the body of a new document. I mean, one thing I reflected is that Christopher Tolkien, who, you know, did such an amazing job with the history of Middle-earth, you know, the one thing I didn't have to do, which he had to do, which was decipher the document and type them out. I mean, I didn't
handwriting.
So the job was a lot easier than it might have seemed on the face of it. And I loved doing it. I found it really exciting. And of course, the real excitement came when I knew Alan was sort of slated to do the pictures, and the moment I was so thrilled. I've worked with John Howe on the books about the maps of Middle Earth in the past. Never had the opportunity to work with Alan, although we'd known each other for a number of years. So that was really thrilling, to be able to see the book being embellished, and although it wasn't my original writings, seeing things which I'd pulled together now being depicted, some of them for the first time. No.
Absolutely. That cover is amazing.
Isn't it? So dynamic. Amazing. Well, like the Silmarillion and to some extent the history of Middle-earth and even the series of books comprising the great tales of the First Age, The Fall of Númenor is a book by J.R.R. Tolkien, but edited by somebody else, in this case, you. That editing process, which you've talked a little bit about just here at the end of that question, or at the end of that answer, I should say, really fascinating stuff. Did that give you any insight into Christopher Tolkien's History of Middle-earth challenge? Because that you talked about deciphering the handwriting, that alone is a task, but then he's not going to have the same electronic tools that you have to put that together. Talk about your process versus what you perceived his process to be.
Well, absolutely right. And I don't think I could have done the work at all if I'd had to retype everything that was there. I mean, there are mistakes which we're going to correct with a paperback edition and a subsequent one. There are a number of typos and things in it, despite the fact that much of the material was being copied from, previous public sources. I think the thing that I gained most from it really was just this. I had an admiration for Christopher Tolkien anyway, but my admiration for him was hugely increased by doing this, simply, as I say, because realizing that he had to not only work with often very fragmentary material. I mean, lots and lots of, many of the things in the book, like the story of Aldarion and Erendis, for example, is a long section, was already published, but, he had often just stray pieces of paper, which he had to date, had to decide when they were written, decipher his father's writing, and then present it in a way that made sense and made reference to other things. So I'm hugely in what he did. I wanted something that was frankly to be as simple as it possibly could be. And I didn't want, I get criticized for putting the notes at the back, and that's fair enough. I know a lot of people like to just look at the bottom of the page and then read the note. But I wanted something which would be a book which people could read as a standalone book if they didn't want to dive into the notes. But I wanted all the notes to be there so that people who did want to know could say, I want to go back and find this in the history of Middle-earth. I want to know where this appears in Unfinished Tales. So this book had to have notes which told that, so that there was never a question of people saying, well, where's that from then?
Right.
I wanted everybody to be able to identify where this material had come from, to know that it wasn't just something that had been made up. There was nothing new. And that right early on seemed to me the great obstacle when the book was announced last summer. And people were quite quickly saying, well, there's nothing new in this. We don't need this. We've got enough books. They're all on the shelf already. And I wanted to say, but it wasn't my place to say really, but I wanted to say, well, yes, but the point is that there are a lot of people who have those books, but they haven't read them all. And some of them aren't books that you actually, and this is no disrespect to Christopher, these aren't books that you necessarily want to sit down and read. They're books that you refer to in many ways. And what I wanted to do was give people a text that they could read if they wanted, just like that. They could follow the footnotes. Yes, you have to turn to the back of the book, but you could follow the footnotes. And if you wanted to know more, or you wanted to know where the heck did that come from, that's where you would find it. And Chris and I were both of one mind that what we wanted to do was put the notes at the back, because sometimes the notes would have taken up more space on the page than the bit of text that they were referring to.
Yeah.
And I've got books like that, where you read 3 lines and then the next page and a half are a note, and then you go back to reading it again. I wanted people to be able to do one or either of those things, but primarily I really hoped it would be, I don't know, I suppose partly for Tolkien fans who've never got stuck into a full history, but also for those people who were perhaps coming, I didn't know, of course, at that time, just how limited the palette of the story was for Amazon, but
Yeah.
The people who were coming to it from Amazon would have something to contextualize that series if they do so. I'm not sure it was very helpful to any of them, but I think to people who already know Tolkien and know a little about it, I think the book does have that ability to give you all that source material in one particular place and in a way that's readable. I mean, Carl.
Yeah, absolutely.
Carl Hofstadter did a fabulous job with the nature. Bringing together for us stuff which much of it we hadn't seen. Mm-hmm. But again, it's not a book to cozy up with and just sit and have a read. And I really wanted this book to be readable. And I thought the only talent that I have in this direction is, which is what I've done with so many projects, not just Tolkien, is making other people's work accessible for a different readership or a different I mean, adapting the radio series, for example, was that. I've done that with many other books as well, like The Once and Future King and the Mervyn Peake's Titus novels and so on. I want to make something which I feel passionate about and love, presented in a way that other people who haven't yet come to grips with it or but haven't got into it in depth are able to gain more from it, something new, and allow them to take their journey forward with that material. But that's what I've always tried to do, as with the film books, where I've always tried to give the reader the feeling that I'm backstage on the set, meeting the people that they don't have the opportunity to actually talk to or find anything from, and to give them that insight, which is not my insight particularly, but it is, if you like, a curated insight from me. And I saw the book as not being so much as an editing as curating it, and putting together this history in a way that I hoped people would find useful, but also be engaging and give them a rather clearer picture of what happened in the Second Age, which I think it does. But it does. Tolkien
absolutely does.
Yeah. But of course, one of the things we had to be very careful about, as you will appreciate, is that where Christopher did the work he did on the Great Tales, he had the ability to be able to do that. As when he did the Silmarillion, he had the right, if you like, to take all the disparate pieces of the Silmarillion and make a text which was acceptable. And he didn't have to put in notes saying this came from page 42 of a manuscript.
That's a good point.
He did identify much of that material later, of course, in the history of Middle-earth. So he did it later. But at the time, he could just pick what he wanted to tell the story that he felt most reflected his father's vision. And clearly that is something which somebody who's not part of the family doesn't have the right to do. So I felt I had to tread a very careful path, and to have the estate's approval. The estate they obviously knew of my other work, and they had confidence in me, which I was pleased to have. But I did feel all the time that I was, as I say, curating material that was not mine, but I just wanted to try and give it to people in a new form that they might enjoy.
Well, I think they will. I know you sort of downplayed the idea that it might not be that helpful to folks coming to it from the Amazon show, but I disagree. I think, a lot of the folks coming to it from Amazon will be familiar with the Jackson films and maybe have never picked up a Tolkien book. And it's a little harder than maybe picking up The Hobbit for your first read, but it is nothing compared to trying to plow through the appendices or the history of Middle Earth or Unfinished Tales. I think it's going to be a great resource for people who know nothing of the Second Age and are excited to find that stuff out. That chronological format is really the key, and I think it helps make it readable. It was a great decision to put the notes at the back, like you said, because they're almost all reference notes linking to places in history, Middle Earth, or other sources. That's what bookmarks are for, folks. That's what bookmarks are for. All right. KnewBetta, time to start talking about some artwork, huh?
All right. So, Brian, one of the things that the readers love about the volume is the incredible amount of artwork from Alan Lee.
Oh, yeah.
Something like a dozen full-size color works and a whole bunch of pencil sketches throughout. As this is a part of the legendarium that's not often illustrated, it's really neat for us to see these. When it came to illustrations, were you involved in deciding what moments would be illustrated, or is it that something that was solely, in Alan's purview?
Well, KnewBetta, I'm really pleased that you mentioned earlier the cover, because when I first saw the cover drawing, which of course has also been put into the book as a front end paper, I was just, as so many other people were, I was totally stunned by it.
It's breathtaking, really is.
But yes, the answer is that yes. Very early on, Alan and I had a Zoom call where we sat and talked about what the book was going to be like, what form it was going to take. And as he started to read the materials I was putting it together, we had calls where we talked about things that might work. And obviously, part of the issue with illustrated books is you have to place the plates at a certain point in the book, because that is to work as well. And certainly we had conversations about one very particular picture, which I will mention, and we perhaps come back to. To me, to draw Moria as it was before the ruination of the place. And the opportunity, it's a one line, I think. It's a 1.5. It's nothing much, where it talks about Galadriel passing through Moria with the elves. And he said, I'd love to depict that because I can show the place in its great glory.
Yeah.
And so that was an example. We also talked a lot about ships and the seascape and the sense of the fact this island is an island and the people who live on it are seafarers. And we talked about various kind of instances of sea life and bird life and so on. And I did say to him somewhere, we've got to have some bears in here. So one of the small drawings that he made shows some of the trees and flowers, but he also worked in 2 bears as well, because I said I really want to see it. If they're not dancing, I want to see them dancing.
That's right, I want dancing bears, man.
Dancing bears.
Great stuff. We need dancing bears in every Tolkien book from now on. That's just the way it has got to be.
That is awesome, man. I know you. Alan Lee is such a iconic figure, and just to be able to collaborate with him on this book, it must have been like a great pleasure and honor. There's 2 giants in the field, man. It's awesome.
Absolutely. All right, Brian. I mean, there's some amazing stuff, and maybe the answer to this is the bears. But out of all the art included in the book, which piece were you most excited to see finished? And then what location, character, or moment were you most looking forward to seeing through his vision? And I guess a follow-up to that follow-up is, were there any that they couldn't illustrate because maybe it didn't fall in the right spot? Because like you talked about, inserting the art has to go in particular places, particular pages. Were there any things that you wanted illustrated that maybe you'd still like to see down the road?
Yes. Well, I think I've probably already told you which piece it was. Having had this conversation.
Won't stop us from asking.
Having had a conversation about what it would be like in Moria before the fall of the place.
That's what I thought.
I was just thrilled when I saw this image, which, of course, gives you this sense of the enormity of what the place was like, but also with this in the foreground, or the lower part of the picture, this procession of Galadriel and the elves and facing the dwarves as they pass through Moria. I think it's a glorious piece of art. I mean, I love all Alan's work, and it's difficult to say which of them are a favourite, because I think there's some fantastic pieces in this book. I love the crossing of the mountains, which is towards the end, where you see Lendil coming down the snowy slopes of the mountains with his forces. You get an enormous sense of the magnitude of what this task was of crossing the mountains. I mean, it's like crossing the Alps. I mean, it is fantastic.
Giving an army that size over the misty mountains.
Yes. I think the thing that I most like about the work Alan's produced for this book, aside from the cover art, which is, an epic picture, really. But what I love is the fact that what Alan does is to convey a sense of scale, which he does by actually not showing you the whole of something. I mean, there's a picture of Sauron's temple on Númenor with the people being prepared for sacrifice. And the figures are diminutive figures climbing these stairs. And there's, burning braziers at the top, and the whole thing has a kind of, the sky is lowering in with clouds and it looks sinister, but you're only seeing an edge of this building. You're seeing just a fraction of this enormous building, which we know was central to what was built in the middle of Númenor. That picture for me just goes to the heart of Alan's great skill, that he gives you the sense he could have drawn that temple from, if you like, in the distance, so it's dominating Amenelos, for example. He could have shown that, but what he does is show us a corner, a piece of it, and immediately, particularly because of the proportion of the in scale to the people who are heading their way up the stair to their doom, you get a real sense of the hugeness of this appalling building. And he does something very similar in the building of Barad-dûr, which I thought was another illustration which I don't think people have actually depicted. It's many people have done pictures of Barad-dûr, no issue there. But what Alan has done is shown the process of building, and he only shows us, a slither of the building. But because that slither is so detailed, and you can see it in relation to Mount Doom in the distance, you get a real feeling of just how tall this enormous building was, So I love that, but I also, of course, love the beautiful pictures. I love the pictures of the Númenorians looking towards the west with the sun setting on the horizon. And I also think the cataclysmic pictures which come at the end, where you see the overthrow of the rebellion that goes to assault the Valar, is again hugely dramatic. So I love the pictures themselves, but I also love the fact that each one of them, Alan has framed in a kind of border. They're not all the same. There are variations in the way in which he presents the picture. And there's just something very inviting in the way that the pictures draw you into, I think, the text, and clearly, give the text, which in many cases is devoid of literal description. There isn't a huge amount of physical description of buildings and places. And obviously these illustrations absolutely fill that gap. But I want to pay a special tribute to Alan for the pencil sketches, which I know KnewBetta mentioned much earlier in the conversation. But the interesting thing about these pencil drawings is that they were not, he was going to do some small decorations, some headers and tail pieces. But very early on, the book went through, although it was on a very short deadline, the book went through quite a major change of direction, in that what I and Chris Smith initially wanted to do was to kind of gather this material, once I'd sorted it, into what would be roughly thought of as chapters. So it might be the return of Sauron, it might be called, and it was something the estate wasn't wildly keen on, I think it's fair to say. So we went back to, we've got this chronology, which is where all the material is located, and that's not changing. But we were left with some of the entries being very, very short. They would have sat on a page, as maybe 6 or 7, 8 lines, maybe half a page. And that would have been there'd have been a lot of empty space. Yeah. And Alan embraced this in a way which, constantly amazed me, because he just started doing those wonderful pencil sketches, and he just did them and did more of them. And in fact, we'd got to the day when everything had to go off to the printers, and he went, no, you can't send it just yet, because I've got 2 more drawings coming through. That was Alan's investment in this book, which is why, when I was saying earlier about the award, or it being awarded the Tolkien Prize for the best book of the year, it's so much Alan's book as well, because his contribution to it has made it into something which is really, I think, a beautiful artifact in its own right. I mean, early on, Chris Smith and I, as editor, had a discussion about, for example, whether we could use a different color type. And so, the headings to the passages, sort of the either the entry that's from the chronology, or in the story, the case of the Aldarian story, which is broken up slightly. Those are all painted in a pale blue, right, as is the headers on the top of the. And it gives the book a real kind of elegant look. It also enabled me to have the ring rhyme printed in red, which is something I really, really wanted to do. Nice. Early on, I said, wherever there's a ruler appears in the chronology, can we have some kind of design which reflects that, perhaps with the head of the staff of the ruling monarch. And so that then became a feature which is embodied in the text. So whenever a new monarch is arriving, there is a reminder. And I very carefully, using it as careful of my research as I could be, I put in really the salient facts of that king or queen, how old they were when they came to the throne, when they died, who they succeeded, that kind of thing. So that all that information, which is fairly kind of dry in a way, was there for you if you wanted it, but didn't prove too much of a stumbling block. But you could go, oh, right, there's another king. We've just jumped 300 years or whatever. So those devices, but Alan's commitment to this project was just, be it way above and beyond anything that he might have been expected to produce. I'm thrilled with the way it turned out. And I don't know, you probably got a question about what I'm going to do next, and I'll hold something back about that, because your question about what would I like to have seen, I don't know. I guess I would have really liked a color picture of dancing bears, but we didn't get that. But the couple of things which, when we get to talking about what I'm up to at the moment, which will, I think, answer your question of what didn't get illustrated. Okay. So
that's fair.
Hold that for a moment.
We'll put that on the shelf. KnewBetta, you've got another question, right?
Yeah. So you've been around the world and works of Tolkien for decades. You know them quite well. As you were working on editing this book, were there any big discoveries, something you hadn't known previously, or connections you hadn't made? Were any of your existing understandings changed or challenged?
Yeah, I think one primarily, and we've already touched on it, but I feel it's so important, is that I don't think I'd fully kind of comprehended, although it's talked about by Gandalf and other characters endlessly in the books that we have, is the fact that this place of Númenor, and I would say I would have liked the rest of the title to have appeared on the cover, because a lot of people have said, well, it's not just about the Fall of Númenor, and that's true. But the full title of the book is The Fall of Númenor and Other Tales from the Second Age, which is my justification. But I think I had a new understanding of why Númenor was special, why it was given to the people it was given to, why it was such a very, very particular gift, and what that told us about how human beings behave. Because, much of Tolkien's writing is about the human condition. It's not about whether they're dwarves or elves or hobbits or humans. It's actually about always the human condition. And, it's informed hugely, and I don't think I've taken this on board either, it's informed hugely by Tolkien's religious beliefs. Oh, yeah. And, Tolkien, I know, was frequently saying it's not an allegory, and he would have not wanted anybody to put any kind of a spin on it to say that it was about related to the way the Christian and Judeo-Christian mythology talks about the fall of man. But he writes in one of his letters, the heart of this story, it is about the heart of every story, he says, is about the fall. And I think that there is a real sense, and I think that does come through in this book now. This is a story of a great gift that was given that was then thrown away because, greed and ambition and the lust for power and all those things that we identify in our own, not necessarily our own personal lives, but certainly in the lives of the world we live in and the nations we live in. And we're seeing it all the time, whether it's in the United Kingdom or the USA or wherever. You can see that level of deep kind of heading towards a corrupt way of viewing the world. is something that Tolkien was writing about in this archaic form, but was writing about it with absolute, he's right on the money for his depiction of human nature and the fallibility of human nature. And that's at the heart, in a way I hadn't realized. So I did quote quite a bit of Tolkien's writings about his religious feelings and thoughts, because I think that it's absolutely there in the fact that when Númenor falls, actually everything changes. Nothing is quite the same again. The whole world is reshaped as a matter of fact, which in itself is an extraordinary concept. But the world, it is like there's no going back. The angel with the flaming sword is at the gate of the Garden of Eden, and you can't go back, to use a metaphor from the Bible. So that came through to me in a way that I don't think it had before. And I don't think also that I'd had quite such a clear picture of, and I'm indebted to Carl Hostetter for some of this as well, of just how much Tolkien did write about what Númenor looked like. The landscape, the cliff faces, the height of mountains, the foliage, the architecture, all those things which are touched on in these many disparate documents. And I'm really pleased that the first part of the book does bring all that together in a so that you can at least start the book by saying, oh, so that's what this place looked like. It's a 5-pointed star, and it's got a city there, and it's got a port here, and the cliffs there are very, very tall, and somebody builds an observatory on the top of it because it's the highest cliff. Those things, I have much more of a physical feeling of the place than I think I had before. So I'm sure I'm slightly alone in that. I'm sure that many other people who've been much more assiduously studied Tolkien's writings before I came to do this exercise would have said, well, yeah, we knew all that anyway. So I bow to them and their prior knowledge.
Good for them. Good for them.
That's what came through to me. That's awesome. What I took.
And that's what we want to know, right? Exactly. Everybody's going to get something different from it that they didn't know. But, being the one who puts together the project, it's really interesting to know what popped to you, what was new for somebody who's been, immersed in his works for so long. You probably have already answered this next question, but feel free to elaborate. We've talked about adaptations at length on the Prancing Pony podcast and in our book. And of course, you are very well known in the world of adaptations. You're undoubtedly familiar with Tolkien's famous letter number 210, or infamous if you happen to be Zimmerman. That's the one about the Zimmerman script, listeners. It's that letter where he makes clear his position about what it is that causes poor adaptations to fail. He says it's due to not perceiving where the core of the original lies. Now, when it comes to Lord of the Rings, the core is, at the very least, the corrupting and evil nature of the ring, the need for it to be destroyed, and the quest that Frodo and Sam embark on to do that. What would you say is the core of the original when it comes to the stories and world of the Second Age?
Well, it's much the same story, as I guess I've already hinted. I would add to your analysis of what the Lord of the Rings is. It's also, I think, very much about that power is not vested in the great. It's said many times by the book, particularly, that it's small hands that move the wheels of fate.
Yes.
But in terms of the Fall of Númenor, I think it is the sense of there's various things. One, I think, is a non-respect of the gift of the world of Númenor for the Númenorians, but us in our world, our disrespect for the world itself, for all its nature. Many of the things that go wrong in Númenor are brought about by, for example, cutting down all the forests and that kind of thing. And Aldarion was a leader of planting more trees because he wanted wood for his boats, but ships, I should say, boats. But I think the idea of the fallibility of humankind. I mean, for me, the most moving. I'm sort of dipping about here back and forth, but for me, the most moving passage in the Lord of the Rings. I've just recently re-listened to the 1981 version. Contrary to what people might think, I don't listen to it on a regular basis. Simply because only now I'm distanced from it enough. But even now, when I listen to an episode, I can remember Michael Hordern and Ian Holm and Peter Woodthorpe in a studio, standing in front of a microphone, reading a script. I can never entirely listen to it, as though I'm a listener who isn't seeing what happened on that day in the studio. But I did listen to it recently, and David and I sat and listened to it we listened to an episode a day for 13 days. And the episode and I happen to have adapted this episode, and I think I probably put it on my list to when I was able to choose which ones of the 26 I would actually adapt, was the one where they come to Mount Doom, and even at that moment, the one person that we've all been rooting for, the one person we care that he succeeds, i.e. Frodo, even at that moment, when Frodo says, "Now I have come, I do not choose to do the thing that I have come to do," is an astonishing moment that even this character who has seemed untouched by, all the way that other people were corrupted by it, that even at that moment, he fails. I mean, he does fail in the doing what he has to do. It is actually Gollum who succeeds in destroying the ring, not Frodo. And those moments, or the moment when Sam, takes the ring in order to keep it safe, when he thinks Frodo's dead. But then when Frodo reacts very strongly when he realizes that Sam has got the ring, those moments really show the fallibility of Tolkien's characters. Yeah. And I believe it's something he really believed and understood in terms of, again, to use his phrase, the fall, the idea that, we have, I suppose Tolkien would have said something along the lines of, it's presumptuous to say this, but I think it would have been along the lines of what he believed, was that we were made for some kind of perfection and we constantly fall short of it. And that's what happens in Númenor to an extraordinary extent, where not everybody, because of course there are the people who remain true, and they are, of course, the people who are able in the end to defeat Sauron, albeit temporarily, but they do defeat Sauron by holding to the truth. But the bulk of the people in Númenor, first of all, we hear that they built tombs in the foothills of the mountain where, the place of their central place of worship. The tombs were built there. The tombs become more and more important to them. Like the ancient Egyptians, they become obsessed with memorializing the life that they've had rather than honoring the life that is actually happening in that place. So I think those are the core of that, of what that story is. I think if one had to dramatize it, which is of course what Amazon are doing, but they're not doing the whole story. I think if I had to do that, that was what I would have held as the kind of core. It would have been that, this is an amazing gift, but what happens to make that gift go wrong? What makes what turns the people from people who are given the greatest gift that the Valar could give to human beings into people who say, that's not enough for me, I want more. And putting the story at its simplest, that is exactly what it's about. It's saying, thank you, but I'm not satisfied with the gift you've given me. I want something more than that. And I've got that, but I want more than that. And I want more than this. And the more you want, the more you then fly in the face of the thing that you were originally given. That for me is the heart of the story, I guess.
Okay.
It's the human condition.
Absolutely. Yeah. You said it.
As a fan myself, and this is just something I do on my TikTok, I always like to ask, depending upon what we're talking about. So we're talking about the Second Age here, the Fall of Númenor, but in that entire age, what is your favorite part of the Second Age, or a favorite event that happens in the Second Age, no matter whether it's inside of Númenor, outside of Númenor? What's your favorite part of the Second Age?
Well, favorite suggests that it's something I like. I love the question. But I think the piece that I find most engaging is, I guess, the point at which Sauron deceives the Númenorians. You know, he's so cunning that he goes and bends the knee to the Númenorian forces, and they are so stupid to underestimate him and think, oh, we've got him as a prisoner now. And they take him back to Númenor, and he has then the perfect opportunity to increase their fears, their anxieties, their phobias, and to bring about the final corruption of the people there. And that is a brilliant example of Sauron's character. In fact, I think the character of many, no, maybe not all, but many people who are not the best people in the world, is that they have the ability to dissemble and pretend that they are, on your side. Yes, I understand. Yes, you're right. I give in, I surrender. But actually, they're working on a different agenda. All the way through, whenever we learn of Sauron, actually, from the end of the First Age through to the end of the Third Age, he is always somebody who has an agenda which is not exactly what it seems. And I think that passage is really fascinating, the way in which, bit by bit, he works his way into the minds of the Númenorians and brings about their downfall. Just indeed, it's exactly the same, of course, as what Tolkien portrays in The Lord of the Rings, with Grima Wormtongue working under the influence of Saruman, who's working under the influence of Sauron, worming his way into Theoden's heart and into Denethor's heart. So Denethor's despair, which I know you've been talking about. Of Denethor.
A lot of that.
And it's the same thing. And it comes back to what you were saying just a minute ago. It is about the human condition, and the human condition is that we are so fallible. We're so gullible at times.
Yeah.
When I look at our current worlds and seeing wherever you look pretty much in the world, there are instances of this, of just people who have, gained power where they should never have been able to get that power, that authority. And we've all done it. We've allowed it to happen, in our own way to a certain extent. We didn't see it coming, or if we did see it coming, we thought it was better for us if it did happen. So there's those kind of ideas that I find it interesting that Tolkien, who seems on the face of it such a conservative and a mild kind of man, had such first of all, an electric perception of the human condition, but also that he was able to write about characters who were so beyond the pale. A man who, I think, certainly all the bits of film of him and sound of him that exist, was a very amiable and pleasant man. Actually totally understood the dark side of the human and
absolutely.
I love the fact it's strong in this book, very strong.
That's a great piece to love, and I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm a big, huge Sauron fan, so if you didn't know, now you know.
Fan of Sauron.
That is my guy.
All right. I thought the other day it was the Witch King's your guy, man. You
both
are on that dark side. All right.
But the Witch King is the second coming of Sauron. If you look at his ascent, it's very much similar to how Sauron rose into power. The Witch King is so intriguing, though. It's just very intriguing.
He is indeed. Well, Brian, you were right in knowing that we would eventually ask you this question. What is next for you? Are there any other big projects on the horizon that you want us or our listeners to know about?
Not many, I'm afraid. I had various people who've sent me emails or written in reviews or whatever. Oh, why doesn't somebody now do a book which covers the end of the Second Age to the end of the Third Age? All those bits of information that we know of what went on from the beginning of the Third Age through to the point where the Hobbit picks up the story, and indeed between the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I'm not sure that's a project that HarperCollins or the estate would readily embrace, but who knows? But what I have been doing, because we've been talking about Alan Lee's work, and I really want to mention this, that the next year's HarperCollins Tolkien calendar is the Fall of Númenor, and so it's a chance to have on your wall as a calendar Alan's pieces, some of the pencil drawing, mostly the plates and the cover. But also he has prepared, and this is what I'm most excited about. I've seen them, so I'm very thrilled. I've seen the finished art. He has created 2 new pieces of art for that calendar. One of them, which I think is you can actually find if you look up the calendar on Amazon or somewhere, you'll see the front cover. The front cover shows, if you like, well, Alan referred to it as like the other side of the cover of the Fall of Númenor, because it is the overthrow of the island, washing the ships towards Middle Earth, which is the faithful departing from. Well, they didn't have a lot of choice about departing because the waves tore them away.
Yeah, your flight is now departing, and I mean now.
Indeed, it's not an image which has gone unillustrated. I think both John Howe and Ted Naismith have both illustrated similar images, but it's still a new piece of Alan Lee art, and wonderful. But the other piece of art, which has not been revealed yet, I mean, I can tell you what it is, but you'll have to wait to see it, is the end of the end of the saga, where the book ends, which is with the fall of Isildur, and it is a picture which he has created of Isildur in the river with the orc arrows showering down upon him, and the ring visibly slipping from his finger, and leaving him so that he is of course visible because the ring is left. So that piece of art. So there's 2 new pieces of art that will be on the calendar. And I've written a short introduction about Alan's work, really just praising his great design and style. And Alan's given me some sort of quotes about why he works and what he likes to do. So I think people, who like Alan's work will find, apart from it being a nice calendar, it'll have a couple of original pieces of art, which won't have been anywhere else previously. And will also, have a little bit of background from Alan on the work he did on Númenor. So that's I'm looking forward to. I can't believe that this is already now at the printers for next year, but it is. I wrote the introduction 2 months ago. I think it went off to the printers just before Easter. But as you know, always with these calendars, you can buy them by June or July. So a couple of months' time, you'll see it. It's already being advertised. You can pre-order it now. But in a couple of months' time, I'm sure it'll be out there with the back of the calendar reveal, which will, of course, show all the pieces of artwork, and you'll be able to see
that's going to be great.
So I hope that something else comes along. This has given me this project is, I've returned my journey through Tolkien. I wasn't planning to say this, but it is a fact. My journey through Tolkien has been across, over 40 years now. And it began in terms of my participating in things in 1981 with the radio adaptation. I then came back to it again when that was made into a different format, and the BBC decided to put it out at the same time as the films came out. So they wanted it subdivided into 3 volumes, which was far from an easy task to do. And I created some new pieces for Ian Holm to read as Frodo in preparing the Red Book. To frame those episodes, which I was thrilled to do, and he did a lovely job in recreating that. And then I did a radio for one of the recorded sets. I did a documentary where we got some of the cast back together, and the composer or the one of the singers. Fans, and talk to people about it. So, I've dipped in and out of these things. Then came the map books, which were great. And they were put into one volume, and that was nice. And, it's just gone on one thing after another, some of them quite small projects. Then the whole of the Jack, Lord of the Rings, and I thought that was done. And then the Hobbit comes, so I do another set of books about that. I've been very privileged in having lots and lots of opportunities, and it's not been my life's work the way it has been for some of the academics who've worked on Tolkien. It hasn't been. It's been part of many other things that I've done, but it's been a core part of my career in so many different ways, and I'm actually hugely grateful to Tolkien for those opportunities, but also for the opportunity to meet the community, because I think Alan, I rate very highly the Tolkien community.
Yeah.
And I'm an honorary member of the Tolkien Society now, but I belonged to the society from a couple of years after it was founded. So I've been, part of that. As Peter Jackson used to say when he was making his first film, it's a fan making stuff for fans.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not sure whether Peter lost sight of that at some point.
We won't be discussing the Hobbit films here today.
maybe about film 2 of the Hobbits. I don't know.
It seems like
but he's undoubtedly the best work about anything to do with Tolkien is done by people who love it.
Yes, 100%.
Or it's the discussions that go on online. Yep. Sites like yours and others, that to me that speaks to the universality of what Tolkien achieved and
absolutely
and the fact that it has happened certainly in my lifetime, because when I first became a fan of Tolkien, all there was the 3 books and the Hobbit, and there was Farmer Giles and
right.
Smith and things like that, and Leaf Bunnigle, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But then, I'm old enough to have bought the Silmarillion when it was first published.
Exactly.
And Unfinished Tales when that was published. Mm. And the way in which, and there was little or nothing written about Tolkien either.
Yeah.
I think when I was adapting The Lord of the Rings, I made a book list for my fellow adapter and the people at the BBC, which said, these books will be helpful if you want to read them. And frankly, there were 3 or 4 titles. I mean, now your bookshelf behind you is all Tolkien, but you could have that many bookshelves that are filled just with commentaries and books about Tolkien.
Absolutely.
And that's all. That's all part of his creation. And
yes, it is.
Some of it's worth more than others, undoubtedly. But it speaks to the greatness of the original creation, that it has generated so much creativity and thoughtfulness and academe from.
Yes, it absolutely has.
The Prancing Pony podcast is part of that.
Well, and I am deeply, deeply proud to be a part of that. I mean, the community is amazing. That's one thing I've learned from just beginning this. Everybody that we've ever had on the show has just been gracious and kind and a Tolkien fan. And that's where we connect. It may be intimidating as can be to have Tom Shippey or Verlin Flieger on the other end of the line, but at the end of the day, they're just fans like us who have just spent many, many more years researching and can say things much more succinctly.
Recently, I had an experience which underlined for me just how I feel about the Tolkien community and the importance of the community. Alan and I were signing a bunch of copies of The Fall of Númenor at the London Bookshop. And it was great because so many people from the society and people I've known for years were showing up. And also a lot of people came along and they brought other books, either connected with Tolkien, some of the movie books or whatever, or other things I'd written. Mm-hmm. And would you sign that for me and do this and do that? Yeah, of course. And I love meeting fans, and I love meeting them because we share a common passion togetred. Mm-hmm. But what really, I didn't expect myself to react in the way that I did. But there were a couple of people who came up and they'd bought 2 copies of Fall of Númenor or 3, and they said, "Oh, could you please put the date?" Or specifically London, and then the date underneath where you signed. So I duly did this. We both signed. And then within, I think it was, it wasn't even 24 hours. Up on eBay, I find there are people who are selling this book, which, retailed for, I'm talking about the trade edition, not the collector's edition, but I don't know, what was it? How much was it? I can't remember. £25. No charge was made for the fact that it had Alan and my signature in it, because that's what we do.
Right.
But of course, the books are Tolkien property, and the people like Alan get to share royalties in how successful the book are. So it doesn't matter how many of the books it sells. I sign books or talk to people about it because I love talking about Tolkien.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
But then, within a matter of hours, I see these books, 25 quid each, and some of the limited edition, turning up on eBay saying, personally signed, dated London and the date, £700, £800.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
And I know that those people are not part of that community.
No, they're not. Speculators.
And worse, they are feeding on those people who I love in the community who were unable to get to that signing and so desperately want to have a signed copy and might be thinking, well, maybe £200 is a lot to spend for it, or $300 or whatever it might be. But I really want to get a signed copy of that. And that, you can't stop people doing it. And I got over it. I got over it within about 36 hours. But I was really kind of incensed because I thought, most of the people, the majority of the people who we met that night were just people who loved Tolkien and wanted to express their love for, what we were doing, or particularly for Alan's art.
Right.
And, they weren't people who were there to make a quick buck. They were there because of other. And I just hate to see that those people, leech off the community. So it sounds a bit sour. And
I don't think so, because at the heart, it's about who the community is, and that we're the ones who show up, who want to be a part of these events. And I know, obviously, being here on the west coast of the United States, I'm not going to be able to go to a book signing in London. And I would want one too, but you don't have to worry. I didn't jack up the price on eBay. Mine is unsigned. I'll just bring mine the next time, maybe to Oxmood if you'll be there. But
I will sign it quite happily.
And of course, the big solution to that is always to just put it to their name, as I always have most. I know. I know that there are people who value their books as being flat signed. I buy and have a big collection of autograph books, and I know that there's a different value in the long term in having a flat signed book. That is true. Yeah.
Although there can be an association copy that you can end up purchasing where the person who gave the book, the author of the book, gave it to somebody who was equally interesting. So signed copies aren't aren't necessarily not worth anything. But anyway, that's. But I love meeting fans. I love saying I'm doing. I'm going. So I haven't got anything to do. I haven't got anything to do creatively, but I'm going to spend a few days in Santiago de Compostela.
Oh, wow.
Some friends from the Spanish Tolkien Society.
Nice.
End of June, which I'm really looking forward to.
That'll be lovely.
And I think I'm going to somewhere else in Spain. The Spaniards seem to be rather keen on me. I don't know why particularly. Going somewhere in early December. And I just love being with those people. I mean, last year, David and I went to the German Tolkien Society's meeting and their kind of convention. I had a great time there. And for me, one of the things I find is that everybody I meet in the community, I learn something more about Tolkien or indeed, what affects people from Tolkien. So it's a two-way process.
It is, absolutely.
I love being there for other people, but I also love what I get from them, which is their enthusiasm and their love of Tolkien. And as I say, often their perceptions, which are things that I may not even have seen myself. So, all power to the community. And
could not agree more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm really grateful to you guys today because, great questions, and it's been just a joy to be with you again.
Well, thank you, Brian. Really, thank you so much for joining us. There's always an open door for you here at the Common Room.
And
thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be able to converse back and forth with you. And you have so much insight and you put so much into the community itself. And we really appreciate you. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Oh, well, bless you. Thank you for really good questions because, good questions get pretty good answers sometimes.
Sometimes they do.
I appreciate that very much.
Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. But be sure to join me again next week when we look to recover after this long battle in the Houses of Healing. I'll be joined by Dr. Sarah Brown of Signum University and one of my co-hosts on the Rings of Power wrap-up. Now, that is going to be a fun run of 4 episodes that you won't want to miss. But before I welcome Sarah, I want to say farewell to you, KnewBetta. It has been a real privilege working with you these last 3 episodes. Knowledgeable, hilarious, blunt, entertaining. Every discussion has been insightful, even if you're dead wrong on the Witch King versus Gandalf. Thank you for being a part of the Fellowship of the Co-hosts, my friend.
Well, I appreciate the invite. I appreciate the experience. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. I'm all the better for it. I realize that not everybody's going to be as smart as me when it comes to the Witch King versus Gandalf, but I digress.
Yes,
thank you so much. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for welcoming me and, giving people like me and fans all around the world, a chance to, showcase their love for Tolkien and be a part of the community through your podcast. So we really appreciate it. And this is awesome. It's one of the highlights of my my Tolkien journey here.
Well, you're most welcome, and I really appreciate it. Like Brian said earlier, it really is about the community. I too get so much out of our guests when they come, out of our patrons who come on the North Wing, our Questions After Nightfall, as well as, of course, this season working with so many amazing co-hosts. So thank you. So once again, just thank you for joining me, and you will always be welcome here in the Common Room, KnewBetta.
Folks, Alan and I want to thank the members of the team PPP, editor Jordan Reynolds, Ballerman, Becca Davis, along with our team of research assistants, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, graphic artist Megan Collins, and website guru Phil Dean.
Speaking of the website, please be sure to visit us there at theprancingponypodcast.com. We've got show notes, hilarious outtakes, Prancing Pony ponderings, and our online storefront where you can get all sorts of PPP merch.
You'll also want to visit our library page. The Prancing Pony Podcast is first and foremost a podcast about books. So if you're interested in a book we've mentioned on the show, you'll find a link for it in our library. The PPP gets a small amount of compensation when you make your purchase, and we thank you for that.
Indeed we do. But we also want to thank our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. I'll start with DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Joseph in Michigan, Kathy from North Carolina, Lori from Washington, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Ned from Connecticut, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, Erwin from the Netherlands, and Dylan in Australia.
There's also Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Karen in the UK, Zaksu in Illinois, Brian in Texas, Sarah in New Jersey, June in Ireland, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, Connor in North Carolina, Keith in Alabama, Erica in Texas, Carson in Oklahoma, Vivian in California, James in Massachusetts and in Kentucky, Roger in Michigan, Shawn in New Jersey, Mason in California. Thank you all so very much for your support.
Indeed. Thank you.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe now through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and, well, most of all, your questions for Brian Sibley's next visit to the Common Room to Bartleman at theprancingponypodcast.com. And if you want your voice literally heard, well, just send us audio of your question. You can visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your question for us.
Please be sure to still email the question to Ballerman. Even though Ballerman's been a lot more reliable lately, there's still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get to you just as soon as we're able.
As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners, guests, and co-hosts in this case. But until next time,
we wish you a very fond farewell.